Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Advanced Container CI/CD Pipeline Orchestration for the OpenShift Environment. Today's presentation is jointly brought to you by Vizuri, Red Hat, and Intel. I would now like to introduce Kent Udy, Technical Director of Vizuri, who oversees our middleware practice.
Good day. Again, we're going to look at advanced CI/CD pipeline orchestration for OpenShift environment. There's lots of posts out there and lots of documentation on OpenShift and CI/CD. If you Google it, you're going to see lots of blog articles, lots of webinars, lots of information about this. The intent of today's talk is to go into not only the tools and some process, but bring it all together and marry tools, process, and best practices to create a very flexible pipeline orchestration process that can be adapted to your needs as you orchestrate your containers on the OpenShift environment. So first, let's take a look at what is CI/CD. So continuous integration and continuous delivery, it's a culture, it's a set of principles and collection of practices that enable application development teams to deliver code changes more frequently and reliability. So those last two words, frequently and reliability, are really what we're trying to achieve. A lot of people talk about digital transformation, and really digital transformation is all about this. It's delivering your code more often and in a more reliable fashion. So continuous integration establishes a consistent and automated way to build, package, and test applications. Then you marry that with continuous deploy, and it automates the delivery of applications to selected infrastructure environments. So again, this webinar is brought to you by Intel and Red Hat. And Red Hat and Intel are big players in the open source community, and they work together to provide you choice of cloud technologies. They provide flexible and agile organizations from startups to established enterprise, and they drive innovation. There's a long history of Intel and Red Hat working together, over 20 years of collaborating to fuel business speed. So now, let's go back to our pipeline activities. What do you want to automate in your CI/CD pipelines? Well, first, we need integration with our source code control systems. And in the most cases, hopefully we're talking about some form of Git, whether it be GitLab, GitHub, Bitbucket. And then we're going to integrate that into our CI/CD process. And through webhooks, we can do triggers. So our CI/CD processes are notified when code changes. Within our processes, we need to communicate. So we need to let people know what's going on. A build started, a build's failed. I need someone to approve something. So we need notification as part of our CI/CD process. Then it's the building of our code artifacts themselves. Java base, we can use Maven and Gradle with our JavaScript node. So we have lots of different ways we can build and deploy code. And especially in a container and a polyglot environment such as OpenShift, you want to plug in many different ways to build code because you're deploying lots of different types of code artifacts. Unit testing. So we want to ensure that our code works at the unit level so that it just makes it more a better quality code as we're going through our process. Integration testing. We want to integrate our code and prove that our code works once we deploy and do full integration testing. Code analysis. This is really big, especially the last few years. So code reviews have been around for a long time, but they can be monotonous, and it's tough, to find the time. So some of these automation around code analysis is really great to bring in your CI/CD pipelines. You can automate some of the routine part of code analysis, like structure, dead code analysis, repeated code, and that part can be automated. And then the actual code reviews can stick to more fundamental things than just low-level things. SonarQube is a great tool to plug in, and we're going to see that today. So then now we've built our artifacts, we've tested them at the unit level, we've run some code analysis. We want to publish those artifacts to some repository, because we have some artifact, whether it be a WAR, a NuGet, something, a jar file. We want to publish that to to some Artifactory or Nexus repository, or any other repository that we can publish our assets to. Then, since we are talking about containers in the OpenShift environment, we have our artifact, so the code we want to deploy. Now we want to marry that and build a container and orchestrate through that container. We have a couple different ways when we're talking OpenShift to build containers. One is we can use the Docker format and Docker build and build a container using the Docker facilities that have been around for a while. OpenShift also introduced a concept called source to image, which allows another way of building layers in a container environment. Once we build our container, we want to push these to an enterprise container registry. This is similar to how we're pushing our build artifacts. So we have our WARs and our jar files out in Artifactory or Nexus. We're going to take our container images and deploy those and tag those very similar. Then we want to scan our images for vulnerabilities. There's some great tools out there, Anchor, Claire, Black Duck, that can be integrated in our CI/CD pipelines that will show us if our containers have known vulnerabilities. And then we talked a little bit about approvals. There might be cases where we're trying to automate this process. So we want to take human action out as much as possible. But at times we do need to ask if it's okay to do a certain step. We can integrate approvals into Jenkins. We can do some social media like HipChat or Slack or email approval processes that we can integrate into our process. Then lastly is the actual deploy. We have our containers, it's pushed to a registry. Now we want to deploy and run these containers on our OpenShift platform. So this kind of brings it all together. As you see from left to right here, we're going to check out our code, build it, unit test it, perform some code analysis with SonarQube, publish the artifact to a Nexus repo, use Docker to build a container, publish that container to our enterprise Docker registry. In this case, we're going to use Quay. Then deploy in our dev environment. Then we do some integration testing to prove that our deployment worked fine. And then we're going to ask for approval to deploy to our test environment. Then we'll kick off our deploy to test, do some integration tests, and then again, ask for approval to deploy to prod, and then do some integration testing against prod to prove that the prod deployment works successfully. This is a somewhat simplified process just for the sake of our webinar. We can add a lot more steps here along the way, and maybe more environments. There may be a staging environment, something that we want to go through on our way to production.